I am literally begging people to stop being enablers. In this video, I'm going to explain how enabling other people hurts you, it hurts the person you're enabling, and it hurts other people around you. It's creating an epidemic of narcissism. So we're going to get into all that, but beforehand, I just want to let you know my upcoming novel, A Song at Dead Man's Cove, a gothic horror novel, is releasing this June. As with all my novels, it does contain themes of attachment and difficult relationships, but also siren folklore, supernatural elements. If you are a fan of gothic horror, you're going to really enjoy it, so make sure you're subscribed to my email newsletter if you aren't already, so that you will find out as soon as it's out. You can find that at dranayudin.com. With that out of the way, let's talk about enablers. So the general rule of thumb in psychology is that there are two ways to create a narcissist. The first one is through complex trauma. Usually, narcissists create other narcissists in their children. Parents who are hostile or excessively critical to their children, as well as being low in warmth and responsiveness, typically produce feelings of inadequacy in their children, and then those children try to compensate for those feelings of inadequacy through overinflated self-worth, constantly seeking approval and admiration from other people, what we call a reaction formation. You feel something unacceptable within you, such as worthlessness, and so you project the very opposite in a facade, such as grandiosity. But there's also a second, less known way to create a narcissist, and that comes from something called social learning theory. Very permissive parenting, particularly excessive parental indulgence and approval, teaches children that they are superior to other people and deserve special treatment, which predisposes them to narcissism. In the longitudinal study from 2015, parental indulgence was found to predict increases in narcissism from ages 10 to 12. Now, both of the ways of creating a narcissist that I'm talking about here can be linked to parenting style. So the first type of creating a narcissist, where you are very low in warmth and responsiveness and very demanding and critical, is in line with authoritarian parenting. The second one that I mentioned, where you are very permissive, you don't put any rules on children, is called permissive parenting. In permissive parenting, the child makes up the rules. The parent doesn't really have boundaries or enforce them. And the child kind of gets their way when they want something. They're overindulged because the parent is afraid of conflict or tantrums. Enabling is a key component of permissive parenting. A child, for instance, throws a temper tantrum because they want something, and the parent, instead of maintaining the rules, caves into them. What does a child learn from this parenting style? They learn, I am above the rules. The rules don't apply to me, and that in turn creates entitlement. Or they learn, when I rage at other people, I get what I want, which results in interpersonal exploitativeness, what we call narcissistic rage later on. But let's back up for just a moment. What is enabling actually? Enabling is basically inadvertently encouraging another person's unhealthy or harmful behavior. So it can often look like trying to save someone from the consequences of their own actions. For example, let's say that Joan hits her grandson. When her daughter Alice stops bringing her son around, Joan's husband pleads with Alice to please give her mom another chance. Her mom is suffering and she's crying every night because she misses her grandson. Essentially, he's trying to shield his wife from the natural consequences of her own actions, that when you hit your grandson, you are no longer going to have access to said grandson. He's trying to prevent her being hurt by the consequences of her own actions. Another example, Johnny cheated on his math test. When his parents find out, instead of letting him live in the consequences of that action, they go to the school and they try to convince the school to drop the suspension. They try to bribe the school principal with donations. Again, sending the message to Johnny that you are above the rules. The rules don't apply to you. You don't need to experience any of the negative consequences of your decisions. Another example. Don is arrested for DV. His mom then tries to get Don's girlfriend to drop the charges and forgive Don and take him back, and even victim blames the girlfriend. But this can even show up in a much smaller scale. For example, Melissa wants to pierce her ears. Her mom is maybe irrationally worried about infection, so she tries to prevent Melissa from piercing her ears, even if Melissa is an adult. Now, this is controlling behavior, but it's also enabling in the sense that she can't stand the idea of her daughter experiencing negative consequences for her chosen actions. Do you notice in a lot of these examples how oftentimes enabling involves some form of manipulation like triangulation, like trying to shield a person from the consequences of their actions by controlling what somebody else in their life is doing? Often enablers will try to control the relationships in the problematic person's life in the hopes that it will spare them from receiving any sort of negative consequence or uncomfortable feeling. Enabling is also about avoiding conflict and confrontation. For example, someone cuts in front of you in a line. Instead of saying, "Excuse me, I've been waiting here a long time, the line's over there," you simply let them. And they are once again reinforced in their belief that there are no consequences for their bad behavior, so they might as well just continue to do whatever they want. Or sometimes people will encourage a victim of abuse to just put it past them, to not bring up their issues with the abuser because they themselves are afraid of how the abuser might react. Enabling also looks like taking on someone else's responsibilities, whether it's a parent doing their child's homework for them, where children learn, "I don't need to do my own work. Someone else will handle my responsibilities for me." Or parents financially supporting their children well past the point where they should be self-sufficient. Children and adult children then learn, "I can always rely on a handout. I'm entitled to what other people have, and I don't need to earn what I deserve." And then those children who had their parents do their homework for them, who had their parents support them until the age of 30, 40, 50, whatever it is, cause a lot of problems for the other people in their life. For instance, I've been in group projects where actually partnering with someone doubled the amount of work that I had to do because I then also had to take on their share of the work, rather than us working together and making things simpler for each other. And lastly, enabling encourages dependency, and specifically codependency. Codependency is a term that originated from addiction research. It's when somebody relies on another person for things they should be able to get within themselves. They're kind of unable to function independently without crumbling under the pressure. So within the context of addiction, somebody trying to save an addict from their addiction, trying to fix it for them when the addict themselves is not putting in the effort. We see this with, for instance, mama's boys who need their mom to do their laundry and cook and clean for them until the tender age of 37, or the person who needs their friend to talk to them at 3 a.m. week after week after week because they're in relationship issues that they can't seem to regulate their own feelings about, or anytime there's somebody who generally has a lack of social support outside of one relationship in their life, whether that is their partner, their mom, a friend, etc. All of these situations are circumstances where codependency can arise. So where does enabling come from? The person doing the enabling most often thinks they are helping. They don't realize that their behavior is harmful to everyone, including to the person that they're enabling. From their point of view, they love this person and they want to care for them and protect them as much as possible. I actually have a really powerful story that highlights this. There is somebody in my personal life who, although I love this person to death, does enable somebody. And for like the 100th time that this person said, "Anna, just be nice, walk on eggshells, all of this," I really leveled with this person and I said, why do you keep making excuses for her? Why does everyone else have to tiptoe around her temper? And why is it never to her that you say, "Please play nice, please try to keep yourself in check"? And for the very first time, I heard the enabler lose their cool and snap and say, "Because, Anna, I don't want my daughter to end up institutionalized." And at that point, it occurred to me, this person thought she was protecting her child. This is a mother who naturally loves her child and wants to make sure that harm doesn't befall her. But the saddest part is that enablers don't realize they're ironically in this position because of enabling. Because if they hadn't let all those slammed doors and rages and screaming and physical abuse go without any sort of consequences, that person would have learned the lesson sooner that their behavior is not appropriate, and they just might have done it a little less. Enablers think they are protecting the person they're protecting, but ironically, they are setting them up to fail because that person is going to go out into the real world where not everyone is going to enable them, and they're at some point going to learn that shit doesn't fly. Enablers also have a very anxious need to control things and other people to prevent negative consequences for their loved ones. Oftentimes, people who are enablers have some sort of anxiety issue. Or sometimes they come from family systems with trauma of their own, where maybe they learned to cope by appeasing or fawning or keeping the peace. That was kind of their role in the family. They were the one that was trying to keep everyone in harmony. And maybe it was a survival mechanism for them at some point when they were a child, but now as an adult, when dealing with other adults or their own children, it's not adaptive anymore. Enablers also enable because of fear of conflict or conflict avoidance or people pleasing, whether it means they're scared of participating in conflict, they try to avoid conflict as a rule of thumb, that's kind of their response to it, or they just want to make sure that people like them. That can mean that they don't confront problematic behavior head on, that they make excuses for a lot of people, or that they try to sweep everything under the rug. And honestly, enablers can be quite codependent. At some point, the enabler must come to terms with the reality that they too are getting something out of this dynamic. Whether it's a sense of being needed by another person, a sense of control or omnipotence, the self-esteem from taking on this self-sacrificial role for feeling like a good person for sparing others pain. Enablers can feel like good, noble people for the enabling that they do without realizing that, sometimes the motives are more selfish than they realize. And sometimes enablers will even punish independence in people who are not codependent with them. So they will really ally themselves with the problematic person because that person is at least codependent with them, but with somebody else who's more independent. There's a sense of resentment there because that person doesn't really need them as much, doesn't provide as much to their self-esteem. Here's the issue. People need to learn from the consequences of their own actions. Remember that graph I showed you of different parenting styles? Permissive parenting can create narcissists. Authoritarian parents can create narcissists. The healthy type of parenting that we should all aim for is authoritative parenting. And authoritative parenting, a huge component of it is natural consequences. There are boundaries, there are rules, and then there are consequences when you break those rules. And those consequences are not overly punitive. They just are what naturally happens when you do a certain action. So for example, let's say that there's a 10-year-old girl who wants to stay up until midnight the night before a test. If she has a permissive mom, her mom is probably going to let her, and then the next day her mom is going to cover for her at school saying she's sick to her teacher. An authoritarian mom, on the other hand, might threaten her or yell at her or manhandle her into going to sleep. Whereas an authoritative mom will try to reason with her daughter, will try to say, listen, this is the rule, you need to go to bed. But if her daughter still refuses to do that, her mom is going to let her live with the consequences of her choice. And the next day, when she's too tired to go take a test, she's not going to cover for her. She's still going to make her go take a test and live with the consequence of getting a poorer grade. Permissive parents send their kids the message that you can do whatever you want and there won't be any consequences. Authoritarian parents, on the other hand, teach their kids that there won't be any negative consequences for you because I won't let you make your own mistakes. And authoritative parents teach their kids you have a right to make age-appropriate choices, and there may be some subjectivity in what constitutes age-appropriate, and those choices will have consequences that you need to live with, that I'm not going to spare you from. Because what happens when someone is chronically spared from the consequences of their decisions? It may sound great, like nothing bad ever happens, but really, they're not learning from feedback in their environment. It does them a disservice because the real world is not going to enable them the way the enabler does. Let's say that there's a teenage son who's constantly verbally abusing his mom because that's what he observed his dad doing. And the mom never sets boundaries with him for this. She just kind of laughs it off. She continues being warm and responsive to him. And then as an adult, that son goes on to verbally abuse his girlfriend. And he feels shocked when he experiences negative consequences for his behavior. Then maybe even runs to his mom to fix it for him. That's the situation of how permissive parenting does not allow people to learn from feedback in their environment. Versus with authoritative parenting, a teenage son tries to verbally abuse his mom. The mom immediately nips it in the bud and says, the way you're speaking to me is unacceptable. It's very hurtful and I'm going to have to ground you for 2 weeks. The son learns that action A leads to consequence B. And especially if this is done over and over and over again, he is getting that message. He's understanding that I cannot do action A unless I want to receive consequence B. And then the next time he thinks about verbally abusing a woman, he might think twice about it because he doesn't want that consequence. Enabling people hurts them. It robs them of the opportunity to learn what is the most adaptive way to move in the world. And if it happens chronically during childhood, it turns them into narcissists and abusers. But enabling also hurts the non-abusive people in a family system. I think many of us have heard the expression, squeaky wheel gets the grease. The person who creates the most noise or problem often gets the most amount of attention and accommodation, while those who are just quietly doing their job are overlooked at best or told they're the ones who need to change at worst. How often do we see a system where everyone but the abuser is expected to bend over backwards for them or walk on eggshells? Where the enabler tells everyone but the abuser to change their behavior. Most often, where you find an abuser, an enabler is not far behind. And it feels awful for the other people in the system. It feels like there's no sense of justice, like they're not allowed to process their righteous feelings of hurt or anger. Not allowed to confront the issue head-on with a problematic person, not allowed to set boundaries. And sometimes the lack of protection from the enablers can be even more hurtful than the abuse itself from the abuser. Because you expect hurtful people to hurt you, but you don't expect people who are supposed to love you to not be able to protect you. Really, the best off person in this situation is the enabler. Everyone else loses. The person getting enabled, the other people around them. The enabler gets to feel good about themselves, gets to feel in control at the cost of everyone else's well-being. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not exactly fun for the enabler either, because you're signing up for a lifetime of the stress of trying to control other people who are ultimately not within your control, which is a losing game, and trying to prevent consequences that will eventually not be preventable. And when that happens, the person being enabled will blame the enabler rather than taking responsibility for their own actions. Anytime we try to control the outcome of somebody else's life, eventually when they don't like something about that outcome, they're going to come to you to blame you. So I'm literally begging people to stop enabling harmful behavior. If you are a parent, do not fall prey to permissive parenting. Do set rules and boundaries for your children. Do let them experience the natural consequences of their actions without trying to save them. Do make it clear what behaviors are and aren't acceptable. And regardless of whether you're a parent or not, stop trying to control the people around you. Stop trying to prevent bad things from happening to adults that you care about. Respect that everyone is allowed to make their own decisions and needs to experience the consequences of their actions if they're going to learn how to move through life in a healthier way. Don't stunt their self-development by trying to shield them from their consequences. Don't get involved in their other relationships or problems. Don't try to triangulate them or manipulate circumstances to fit what you think would be best for everyone involved. And when someone is speaking up for themselves or setting a boundary with someone, for the love of God, don't try to discourage them from doing so. Don't punish them for doing so. Don't try to silence them. Just because you yourself don't always have the comfort level to handle conflict, with all due respect, it doesn't mean that other people can't. You could give a man a fish every single day, or you could just teach him how to fish. In this situation, letting people learn from the consequences of their behavior is teaching a man how to fish. It is giving that person life skills that means they won't need to rely on you forever anymore. At some point, they're going to know what to do on their own. Don't solve their problems for them. Don't take on their responsibilities. Get your self-esteem from within yourself, from your own life, not from somebody else's. Work on your codependency and the secret gains that you get from it. I hope this was helpful. I'll see you soon.